Welcome back to another TM Bite. Welcome, Mackenzie. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, thank you. It has been an eventful past little while and going to be a very eventful end of the year.
Man, and aren't things really speeding up? Like we can't even keep up. We're working on trying to, release more content that's going to be valuable for you guys. But we, again, find ourselves in a place where we want to get you information right now. And one of those things is kind of circling back to what we talked about last time. So the last time we talked was more about this major civil gathering of leaders. We talked about the Leaders Climate On Summit. We talked about the G7. And we see how there's like this mirroring happening of everyone aligning under this climate agenda and some real action being put behind it. And we see the Pope at these things. And we're hearing terms like carbon pricing and like climate finance. And these are all very civil terms used by civil government, yet the Pope speaks at this event. And when we think about it, with all these leaders gathering and agreeing to this stuff, they're really there as representatives for their larger countries, right? So when they agree to something, you're now getting huge portions of the population to agree to this stuff. So, it makes me wonder, when the Pope speaks at this event, is he speaking as a religious figure or is he speaking as a civil figure? Because now, just yesterday or in the last 2 days now, it might have been, the Pope has come forward with two other prominent religious figures of the Orthodox Church and the Anglican Church, representing 1.6 billion people total, saying they're coming together to ask everybody to align on this climate agenda. But the narrative is a little different. It's not carbon pricing and climate finance. It's ecological sin and, caring for our common home for the common good. So the narrative has changed a little bit, but there's one figure that seems to be in both arenas, the civil and the religious. It's the Pope. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason we want to bring attention to that, because this unity over this climate agenda has married two sides of an argument, a social and a spiritual, into one system. And it looks as though that the Pope is straddling both sides of those things.
Yeah, we see that the religio-political aspect here is like really coming together in all of these events, especially a lot of these plans. And one of the plans in Laudato Si, or the plans in Laudato Si, is going to be launched in the 4th of October, which is coming very soon. And it's very interesting because this is apparently a religious organization. But what's very interesting about the Roman Catholic Church is that it is not just religious, but it also has political clout as well, right?
Exactly.
It's a religio-political power.
Mm-hmm. Recognized as such, right? It's not just them claiming their political power. The rest of the world's governments have acknowledged them as a political power. And I think it's one of the things that maybe people who are on the fence about this stuff, or even are on the side of like, I don't even care, I'm not religious, I'm not Roman Catholic, they're not acknowledging the fact that this is actually a monarch of a universal...
This is a world power.
Government. It is an acknowledged world power. And I think we want to look at that a little bit more today and explore the titles that the papacy has given itself to establish that they claim themselves to be, on the civil side, king and universal monarch of the world. And I know that's a claim that may seem like strange to some, and there may even be people that would say, well, any small territory some guy can sit on a throne and make claims that he's king over everybody else.
Well, this isn't just any little territory.
No.
We're talking about a power that has been around for a long time, that they have had a huge impact in history and will continue to have a huge impact in history. And that's why it's very important to see the connection there between the religious and the political aspect. And that is going to get even more stronger as time goes on. We're going to see that getting, it's showing its head even more.
Yeah. And we actually are seeing that now through climate law, right? So we need to understand where the marching orders came from, because let's first look at these civil claims that the papacy makes of themselves so we can understand what these encyclicals from the Pope really are. Fratelli Tutti and Laudato Si are marching orders from a king to his subjects to carry out to the rest of the world. And so that civil and religious union has now found its common topic or common ground in climate change, with, as we've already discussed in previous episodes and at length, the pandemic acting as a catalyst to allow the world systems to be shaken up to prepare it for this full transition to this new system, and to give it a basis in morality, which we're going to see is always where the nature of the topic will come back to. It'll always come back to morality. Now, we're going to look at an old book called Romanism as a World Power and review some of the claims that are found in there, and we'll try to give a link to it. If not, at least we'll show you where you can find it. I think Google Books might even have it. But it does a really good job for a book written in the 1920s of laying out the claims of the papacy as a civil power and supporting it with quotational evidence, meaning using the experts or even internal sources from the Vatican itself to describe its power and how it's seen compared to the rest of the world. So we establish first that the Pope says he's the king of a universal monarchy. And the quote here is given by the Archbishop of Wisconsin in a letter from April 8th, 1921. He says, American Catholics should understand clearly the teachings of their faith, namely, that the church is not a republic or a democracy, but a monarchy, that all her, the church's, authority is from above and rests in her hierarchy. Such is the essential constitution of the church given her by Jesus Christ, who placed all the powers and rights of the government in his visible kingdom on earth, both in things temporal, there's our spiritual, our governmental civil component, and things spiritual. Well, now here's our religious component, which we're seeing now, the uniting of the Christian leaders, exclusively into her visual rulers, the bishops. So this is very clear that this is a monarchy with a king at its head, and it's not just a normal king from their perspective. We're looking at a king that by divine right has dominion over both things temporal, which means physical, and spiritual or religious.
Yeah, so they're talking themselves that this is what they are. They are religio-political power. And we can take this way back even further to 1595. This is a quote from Thomas Aquinas, and one of the most prominent and most quoted saints in the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope, by divine right, hath spiritual and temporal power as supreme king of the world. He can impose taxes on all Christians and destroy towns and cities for the preservation of Christianity. So that's pretty serious.
Or the common good. Let's replace Christianity there with common good, because it's essentially the same concept that they're promoting. And we could, Mackenzie, we could present literally thousands of more citations supporting this. This is really just a brief overview, but we can with certainty understand that the papacy sees themselves from a civil power by a religious assumption. So they're assuming this temporal power because of their apostolic succession of Peter, as they would say. Their authority that they've been given by Christ himself to have this dominion. And they allow or tolerate other governments and rulers and different types of ways of living only because of their tolerance of it. It's not actually an acceptance. It's really
Yeah.
more of a tolerance for the time being.
Well, we knew from the situation in the Dark Ages that they had the authority back then, and it wasn't tolerated. Right now, at this point in time, anyways, for a short period, it has to be tolerated because they're not back to that same status they were before 1798.
Right. Which is when Napoleon went in there and essentially all the teeth of the papacy was fully removed. But
Yeah.
we've got this claim now that the papacy is this universal monarchy with the Pope at this universal head with dominion over all. Well, wouldn't the traits of a king show if this claim was true? Well, don't we find the Pope seated on a throne? We do. We also find the Pope wears, and when we say the Pope, it's the seat of the Pope, not necessarily the individual that sits there currently, although that can be the subject of discussion too. When we say the Pope in this sense, we're saying the seat of the Pope wears a three-tiered crown. Many have seen this, but may not fully realize its full implications because a crown very often represents the totality of the kingdom that would be there. In fact, the king of Babylon's crown, when he went and conquered other places, you could tell it was the king of Babylon and not some neighboring lesser ruler that was coming. This crown means something. So when you see the papacy wear this three-tiered crown, Mackenzie, what is that three-tiered crown inferring?
Well, we have three layers, so it's saying that it's encompassing everything from heaven to earth to under the earth. So we have those three layers that they are saying that they are king over all of these things. And they are making that very clear and public because they are saying that they are political ruler, but also ecological and spiritual. So there's all the components there that they are embodying, and they are putting their clout forward, and that's going to become more apparent soon.
And I think that's what we're seeing when we hear terms like environmental sin and ecological justice. There's this merging of civil and religious happening under the guise of a global issue.
And that's basically what Laudato Si is, right? It's a bill. So that's a political thing. And he's wanting to get buy-in from political leaders. That's the whole purpose of this, is to get governments to endorse the Laudato Si goals.
And when people say from a distance, well, isn't religion losing members, and aren't these things waning? We'll look at a couple of statements in a little bit that kind of show that they don't really care where you're at spiritually. You're included. You can think whatever you want, feel however you want, believe whatever you want. You're included, and we can. If they don't get you from the religious side, they're going to get you on the side of, well, we only have one planet. We have to save it, and we have to do everything for the common good. In fact, individualism itself must die in lieu of the common good. But getting a little ahead of ourselves on that.
Well, and just another comment there as well. There's actually not that many atheists in the world. Most people are religious in some form.
And they call it spirituality.
Yeah,
but yeah,
spirituality. There's all these terms, and then you can garb that however you want. But there's only, I think, confirmed like 200 to 250 million actual people who deny a deity of any sort. So that's not a very big number. 240 million self-identified atheists worldwide.
Out of what, 7+ billion
out
people?
of over 7 billion people. So that's a pretty small number compared
Not
to...
an insignificant number, mind you, but small.
Compared to the rest of the religious world.
I agree. But, one of the things I wanted to point to was people understanding the relationship that the rest of the world has with the papacy. That is done through their ambassadors. And that's on, let's say, the United States, which at the time Romanism as a World Power was written, the author thought was preposterous and absolutely unthinkable, unimaginable that the United States would ever have a representative at the Vatican as an ambassador. Yet here today, they've been there for over, I believe, 30 years now. But that these ambassadors sitting in the Vatican at Vatican City represent a royal court of sorts. And actually, on the flip side, as the Pope sits as a king, he requires, as all kings do, first allegiance from his subjects everywhere. And I want that to sink in for a second, because unlike other religions, for the most part, you are tangibly linked to a king and his kingdom in the Roman Catholic Church. And this was something that was known long ago in the early days of the United States, and even on into the early 1900s, something that was well established, even though at that point things had really started slipping in the favor towards the papacy. But here's the quote. It says, "The Pope, as supreme ruler of the world, requires all his subjects everywhere to give him first allegiance superior to their allegiance to the country in which they live." Honorable Gilbert O. Nations, in his book, Papal Sovereignty, on page 181, says on this subject, "So long as the sovereign pontiff claims and exercises temporal jurisdiction and participates in the diplomacy and political of the world, his subjects are bound by the same conditions that bind the subjects of other monarchs. No Roman Catholic, while retaining membership in the Papal Empire, which is identified as the Roman Catholic Church, is entitled to citizenship under any civil government." That's quite a claim. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm just reading what he's saying. But now imagine if this judge was told that 6 of the 9, I would say 7 of the 9 actually Supreme Court justices are Roman Catholic. The president is Roman Catholic. The head of the House of Representatives is Roman Catholic. I mean, they're sprinkled all over. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, people don't think she's a Roman Catholic. She absolutely is a Roman Catholic, and is doing a good job of furthering the papal agenda and getting climate activists in these key stakeholder positions, but we won't go into that right now.
You basically have a foreign takeover happening by that.
I think people will think we're crazy for saying that, but if they really looked at the whole historical context of the nature of this power, how they've dealt before with powers, how their structure's set up, I would be hard pressed to say that you'd have to prove these claims.
Well, this is how the Roman Catholic, how Rome, and it just went from the original Roman Empire to a papal Roman Empire. They just kind of flipped the hat over. And the original Roman Empire gave its dominion to the papacy, to the spiritual aspect, and said, okay, you're in charge now. And in history, what we're seeing here is exactly how Rome conquered before. They came in, they acted like they were your friend. We've seen this with Egypt early on. There was a young pharaoh. He was a young kid. Rome came in. They said, we'll support you. We'll help you. All these things. The kid ended up dying. Rome received all that power. And so that's how they went about conquering, is they would gain friendship, and then they would take over because the influence in that country is now so overwhelming. They're the only options, because there is no other options in the government seat other than themselves. So it's either you pick us or you pick us, because there's no one else there.
And we can even see the influence of these other organizations. So the Pope, we're contending now that he's the king of this monarchy, and that he's expecting his subjects to enforce his ideologies, which now we're seeing being done around the world through climate legislation and the push towards both October, the spiritual event, November, the civil event, Glasgow COP26 event. Pope comes to Canada, I believe, in December for discussions on what happened here recently with all the discoveries at the schools. But what's really interesting is people don't realize that he still maintains an army as well. No monarchy and no king is a kingdom without an army. And people would say, well, how is that possible? I don't see them taking up arms. But it's not always a military of weapons that are tanks and guns and bombs. They have much more effective tactics as such as Mackenzie was just describing, because what he described is actually exactly what one of the arms of the army of the Pope does. And I want to quickly read this quote from Romanism as a World Power on this. It says, the Pope is creating numbers of counts, countesses, knights of military orders. In this one, he points out St. Gregory is in the defiance of the Constitution of the United States, which clearly forbids the granting of such titles of nobility, such as knights. Well, boy, there are a lot of Knights of Malta in the United States. There's a lot of Knights of Columbus in the United States. But I'll go one step further and say the one we should be most aware of are the Jesuits. Those are the ones who have gone in and in a lot of cases befriended or acted as the confessional for these leaders and are influencing them. And you can see that they're a military order easily because the head of their order is titled a superior general. There is no other application in the world where that title is given except within military ranks.
And the oath that the Jesuit order has to take is no less than any sort of military oath. It is an oath unto death. And you don't have to, and this is not taking our words for it. You can go and look up the Jesuit oath. This is still in effect. This is not something that, oh, this is old Jesuits. This is not, happening now. And one of the lines in the Jesuit oath says that they will destroy heretics and their governments and rulers and spare neither age nor sex nor condition, to be as corpses, so that you are the Jesuit that's signing the oath, to be as a corpse without any opinion or will of my own, but to implicitly obey my superiors in all things without hesitation or murmuring. That's just a small portion of the oath that they have to take.
Right. But it captures exactly what we're talking about, a blind obedience mindset, which is, the Jesuits were created to destroy Protestantism. There was no secret about that. It's been laid out in councils and Vatican documents for ages. They even have statues to the effect. So let's not pretend like there's some secret agenda to their creation. They were created with a purpose, and that purpose carries on today. But just to point out, on the civil side of things, it's a king, a monarchy, and his army. And now we want to cross over into how we can establish that these orders from Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti have crossed over and really are these UN Sustainable Development Goals, that these are the representation of one same agenda.
Yeah, and you can find that in mercyworld.org. And this is about the Laudato Si Action Platform overview. So Laudato Si is actually a 7-year plan that Pope Francis is putting in effect, and it'll be officially launched on October 4th. That'll be the formal launch. And it calls for 7 goals. So basically that'll be a goal a year because it's a 7-year plan. And here's the 7 goals. A response to the cry of the earth, a response to the cry of the poor, address ecological economics, adopt simple lifestyles, meaning owning nothing, that's pretty simple, engaged in ecological education, develop an ecological spirituality, and to communicate engagement and participatory action. So this sounds no different than the 2030 agenda or any of these other agendas that we see that they're trying to put forth.
Well, in fact, it says further down in the article, Pope Francis, with his Laudato Si vision and his moral leadership, which is going to continue to be a theme, this morality and him being the authority of such, will be key to the work of these conferences. It says the years ahead of implementing LSAP 7, which is exactly what you just described, the 7-step plan, will coincide with the last years of working to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's your link. These two are coinciding with each other, working in tandem to achieve on the spiritual side, the LSAP 7 goals, which because all the things you read are spiritual in nature. And then on the civil side, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Right under that last sentence, where it tells us this clearly. It says the agenda is universal.
Yeah, and you guys have seen in our other episodes where we're connecting the papacy to the United Nations. So that connection is extremely clear.
But what blows my mind is they're telling us that these connections are there, and that the agenda is universal, the goals are complementary, and they concern us all. This idea that it's universal and concerns us all, I think we need to go to our Bibles and take a look at what Bible prophecy told us about. Because some people are afraid of Bible prophecy. Some people think that it's not meant to be understood. There could be tons of interpretations, but we will come to find that the interpretations have actually been pretty well established for a while. It's just a matter of sticking to what the scriptures are showing us. And why don't you paint a picture of what we're expected to see according to the Bible in terms of conditions and what we would see leading up to the return of Christ?
Well, a good place to start would be Revelation 18:9. And this paints a very clear picture of kind of what we're seeing today. Revelation 18:9 says, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning." Now, let's couple that with Revelation 17. So going back a chapter, starting at verse 2, "With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have made drunk with the wine of her fornication." And then we can jump down to verse 13. "These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." So this beast that's referring to is none other than the Catholic Church. And it says that all these different earthly kings and powers are going to give their power to the beast.
And that last one you pointed out in Revelation 17:13, they're going to have one mind. So let's look at what the Bible says is going to happen and recompare it to what we just saw Laudato Si and the United Nations goals have said. So it says all nations are going to be involved, all of them. All nations have drunk of the wine. So you don't get to sit on the sidelines on this, unfortunately. As with some of the mandates now, we are going to be continually compelled to make decisions like this. And I speculate a little here, but I imagine we're going to have a lot more decisions like this than what we're just currently dealing with coming up. All nations, all people are going to be affected. In that, the kings of the earth are going to be the drivers of this change. Just as we see them all meet at a climate summit, if they are getting together to represent their larger constituents of people, well, the driver of this change to affect all nations will first be adopted by the kings of the earth. But the kings of the earth have said we have one agenda, we have one mind, we speak as one in common. So then it leads to the question, whose one agenda is it?
So I'd actually like to start with verse 8, just to go off of one thing that we mentioned earlier. "And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him." So we see again that all the kings of the earth, all the earth will worship him.
It's going to involve everybody, no matter what you feel personally about things.
Yeah. So then let's jump down to 12. Actually, we can start at 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So we have a very interesting time frame here, because we know that the papacy did receive, and it was even in the newspapers, that they received a deadly wound, and that was in 1798 when the Pope was taken captive. So it matches just perfectly right into this spot.
I feel like we hear the papacy use this wound language subtly a lot.
Yeah.
The healing of the wound. They're aware of this history.
Yeah. And they're saying that this, what the Bible is saying here, is about them. If you go to Rome, all the representation here, the representation in Revelation 17, they have that outside of St. Peter's Basilica, statues of all these imagery. So they're saying, this is me. If you're reading the Bible, this is me. I'm going to be a world power again. And then it says, and it exercises all the power of the first beast before him. So how would that be? How would another kingdom exercise all the power of the first beast?
It's going to mirror what the first beast did. And that first beast was a persecuting power. When we look at history, we see a long period of the Dark Ages, which is the 1260-year period, where the papacy ran supreme. And it's known as the Dark Ages for a reason. In fact, when you go to the Vatican, what do you find on their front door?
You find all the terrible depictions of the Dark Ages and all the torture that happened.
Yeah, they're aware, which is interesting because now they're claiming morality, being the king of the earth, having all these things. But, Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits. And the character of Jesus just couldn't even possibly have associated with the things that have happened through this. But let's not lose track of what we're trying to point here. The point we're trying to show is there will be 2 powers. It will be the papacy in the United States, who will get people together under a civil guise, but it will also have a religious aspect that will have this one mind and compel the kings of the earth to agree on this agenda. And once that happens, you'll see that the power the first beast had, this persecuting personality, so to speak, will start to show up again in this second beast, the United States, that will then start to end up speaking like a dragon, it says. So it will end up speaking in this force tone, in this force system. And, there's so many ways for Bible prophecy to fall apart, yet here we are in 2021 with a Roman Catholic president and a Jesuit pope who are actively engaging the world in ecumenism to support this climate, eco-justice, socio-religious issue, exactly as the Bible said it was going to happen. So if these interpretations were incorrect, and I know a lot of people out there have been waiting for us to bring up Kabbalism and the secret Jewish cabal that's behind these things, that it can't be this forward-facing papacy that's really behind these things. It's the other way around. Well, it actually can't be. If you're a Bible believer, it can't be. If you have your own worldviews, sure, it could be whatever you feel it could be. But if you take the Bible as an authority, it cannot be such, because the characteristics that are outlined are so specific and outline a power that lasts and transcends so much time that it can't possibly operate in the world today as a subtle subversive underbelly. Even though it looks like the roles are reversed, it will be the papacy along with the United States that compels this world into this final system and aligns them under this spiritual ecumenism that, as we've seen with the pandemic, will isolate a very small group of people who are holding on to their conscience and won't be compelled to move on that. So all of these things are leading up to that point. But before we get to that point, don't we have to see the ripples of these pieces coming together?
That beast has to start healing its wound. And we see the healing of that wound. The papacy is coming back to the forefront. And actually, in chapter 13, let's jump down a little bit to verse 15, because it gives a little bit more explanation here. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that hath the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. So this is saying that eventually this is going to go past climate laws. This is going to go past all of these things, and it's going to turn into a religious worship law, worship enforcement. We can see the connection there even to the climate agenda, because what did the Pope want to implement? Climate Sundays. So Sunday is a worship day. He thinks that we should be
Specifically a Roman Catholic creation of worship day, yeah.
set up by Roman Catholicism, absolutely. And that is going to shift from just about climate change over to an actual enforcement of worship of this power.
Yeah. And we see the trickle down effects because this is supposed to be a bite. Sometimes the bites are big, sometimes the bites are small, but we have to get you this information. And the last bit we want to introduce is just to show how real this is and how real it is in terms of coming to our front door, that these ideologies in Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti are now trickling down to the civil leaders of the world and other civil organizations like the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, but also things like the World Economic Forum and things like the Rockefeller Foundation. These are all very easy connections we're not going to go into. But what we see, this trickle down, is it's filtering through by the time it gets to us. And as of September 13th, 2021, we will have this vaccine passport system that is given to us by the World Economic Forum and the Rockefeller Foundation. It's called the Smart Health Card Verified app. And it's part of a bigger project that these two are pulling out called the Commons Project, which is essentially digitizing all of this technology to track and manage this pandemic. And it says it's all built digital services for the common good.
Everything's about the common good, common health. And this is, everybody needs freedom of choice. That's what the Bible promotes, is freedom to choose. That's why Adam and Eve had a choice. Everybody has a choice. But when we start enforcing our ideas on others, then we're getting into tyrannical and oppressive government. And this is where the papacy is not shy of this. They are enforcing these things, and they will be enforcing stronger and stronger and stronger. They said we cannot have individual action anymore. Everything needs to be about the common good. You don't have individuality anymore because it's not about you.
And we will see common good as the thread, so to speak, that brings all of these pieces together. So when you see things like the Commons projects coming in, it's not the Canadian government or even our provincial government giving us this app. It's the World Economic Forum, who we've already linked extensively to the papal agenda. And to me, that really just shows kind of how quickly things are going, because now with just a slight turn for the worse that could be introduced at any time, this surveillance, this change in the system in our lives, the privacy, the individuality that so many people gave their lives to keep intact, will be dismantled for the common good. Now, we know these things have to come to pass, but it's still remarkable to see the pieces really coming and hitting home, and especially as of September 13th now, our own province changing to reflect these people's ideologies.
And we need to be aware. I mean, we don't need to be fearful of all the things that are happening. We know they're coming down the pipeline. We just read in the Bible that even more things are coming, but there's a reason that it's written in the Bible so that we can know ahead of time. We don't have to be scared of these things. We know ahead. This is coming from the World Economic Forum. This is a global agenda. This is a United Nations agenda. This is a Catholic agenda. What does the word Catholic mean? It means universal. So it says it right in the name. This is a universal movement, and it's not going to stop until it gains full dominion over the world again as the number one leader. And all the other kingdoms will bow down to that image.
And you want to know one of the key differences that will keep God's people identifiably apart from all these gathering of all the world, and there'd be a remnant left over, it says, is that they pray for their enemies.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not told these things so that we can be fear. I'm not a God of fear, the Bible says. I'm a God of peace.
Last thing, we never do this, but we should do it more often. But please like and subscribe. If you want other people to hear this information, click the notifications button, set up your alerts. We're going to keep trying to bring this information to you as recent and as current as possible, but help spread the message. Give it to other people. Share this, even if you don't think they're going to agree with it, but plant that seed that allows them to see what God is going to reveal for them in truth later. And we're grateful for each and every one of you. And Mackenzie, thanks for jumping on today, man.
Thank you very much.